It's live. It's on the air right now. The D-Toxd Digest podcast. The podcast that'll give you insights into life so that you can make every moment matter. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hey, and welcome to episode 6 of the D-Toxd Digest podcast. Our podcast where we give you insights into life to help make every moment matter. In tonight's episode, we're going to be discussing part 1 of something that we call the Circle of Life. It's a tool that we use at our retreat out here in Spain where we help people do all things around healthy living. And it's a coaching tool as well that we use that helps us to understand how we create our reality and why we potentially behave the way that we do. And in part 1 tonight, we're going to be discussing our internal reality. We recorded this episode while we were doing a live stream on Facebook. So hopefully it all makes sense and you enjoy it. So I hope that you're all well, and I'm just going to dive straight into it. Every Monday night here at D-Toxd Living, we kind of like to do a bit of a live stream to share with you some of the things that we think about and some of the things that we believe in the hope that it can get you to start thinking differently. And these are some of the tools that we use at our retreat out here in Spain when we're coaching people, when we're talking to people, when we're trying to get to see how their mind works and get them to see inside their minds and that sort of stuff. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is something that we have called the Circle of Life. Now, some of you may have seen this. So I've got a diagram here. If you can imagine that there is a big circle, and that big circle is divided in half. And on each side of the circle, we have 5 sections. And those 5 sections are going to represent something. One half represents our internal world, and the other half represents our external world. And what we're going to focus on tonight is our internal reality, or like we say here in the middle of the circle, how we create our reality. Now, I want to give you a little bit of insight as to where the Circle of Life came from and why we started using it. For those of you that know me, you'll know that I have some challenges with mental health. I live with bipolar and schizophrenia. So understanding how my mind works has always been a big driver. It's always been something that I've strived to understand because I've wanted to learn how to live with my conditions in peace rather than to live being defined by my conditions. So it's always been my personal learnings that have helped me to push myself forward to look into things and say to myself constantly, well, why am I doing that? Where did that behavior come from? How is that behavior reflected at me? Why am I feeling a certain way? And that's how I came up with the Circle of Life. When I met Jerome, he focused on the external reality. So everything that went on outside rather than looking inside. And for me, it was all about this internal battle and this internal struggle that we have. All of us have it in one way or another. We all have this constant churning over in our minds of things going over and over and over and over that nobody sees, that nobody outside of us knows is going on. And that internal churning or that internal moving of the wheel creates our external actions as well, or the external things that we do. So we're going to talk tonight about the internal workings of the mind. We're going to focus on one side of the circle and look at the internal reactions and the internal functions of the mind. Now, I'm not going to go into them in too much scientific detail because I'm not here to do that kind of thing. What we like to do at D-Toxd is make things as simple as possible so that you can look at them straight away and go, I get where that's coming from, or I get why that is happening. So we've done all the hard work, I guess you could say, to make things as simple as possible. Now, we all may have heard about the law of attraction. It was made big by a movie called The Secret a few years ago. A lot of personal development speakers talk about the law of attraction, and how thoughts become things. We've heard how if we focus on something, it's going to become a reality. But if that's the case, then why is it that two people can focus on the exact same thing and two completely different things happen? It's because what has happened to you is completely different to what has happened to me. And my internal world or my circle of life is going to be totally different to yours. If I detach myself from the human body and take Gareth out of the body and look at the body as a machine, they all function pretty much the same way. Along our journey in life, we may have had little accidents, or we may have gone through things that have made us do things in a certain way that potentially may have, I'm just going to use inverted commas here, that potentially may have damaged us. But we all have the same inner workings and the same inner functions, bar a few simple things. So why is it that I don't see reality the same way as you, and you don't see reality the same way as me? And what we need to start to realize is that it is because of this circle of life. Now, we believe that when we were born, this circle basically functions perfectly. Now, I use the word perfectly lightly, but we just go from one thing to the next and it flows smoothly. But along the way, we encounter certain situations that kind of like blow the fuse in the plug. Now, if you've ever had a plug or one of these things, a socket or a plug that goes in the wall, and sometimes we have a power surge, it blows the fuse and we have to change the fuse. If you open up the plug, it's going to be a little bit smoky, there's going to be a little bit of damage, and then we replace that fuse, but the plug itself never ever functions the same way. That's kind of like what happens to us in life. Early on in life, certain things happen that interfere with that perfect flow, and we start to respond and react differently. So we're going to, like I say, work on the internal world. And I'm going to be writing notes as well as we go along. I'm just finding my pen. So now my internal world is how I see myself. So I've just written it down on my piece of paper. My internal world is how I see myself. Think of it like this. What or who is the person that you see when you look in the mirror? Is it the same as the person that people outside of you see? Or do you keep things a secret? And I'm putting those in inverted commas. Do you keep some things a secret from those people? So my internal reality is what I see when I look in the mirror. It's how I perceive I am seeing myself. So we're going to start at the top here. The first thing that goes on in our circle of life on the internal world, can you see that? It's thoughts. Now, my thoughts, I'm going to break it down and make it as simple as possible. My thought is a physical pattern of electricity in the brain that is triggered by something that goes on around us. I want you to think about this, or I want you to do a little bit of an experiment with me. Don't think about a blue dinosaur. The first thing that you have to think about before you don't think about something is something that you have to think about. Now, we heard that in personal development trainings, and I cannot remember who came up with it, so don't quote me on that. But our thought is something that happens in our brain as a result of something that goes on outside of us. We may be walking down the road and we see something that we don't even realize that we see, and it triggers something to pop up from the subconscious mind. So as we know, our mind is made up of our conscious mind, which is everything that we consciously think about and talk about and all that sort of stuff, and our subconscious mind, which is where everything is stored. Now, the only way that my brain can talk to me is through images. And what will happen when I see something, whether I realize it or not, is it's going to trigger my subconscious mind to pop up an image. And we'll be walking down the road, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, bam, a thought will come into our minds. That is what we believe a thought to be. It's kind of like a mini movie that has no beginning and no end. It just happens. It just pops into our mind, and we sit there and we say to ourselves, oh my goodness, where did that come from? So once we've got that concept of thoughts, the next thing that we are going to go into, I'm sorry, I can't talk and write at the same time. Once we have a thought, the next thing that goes on in the body is it influences or it affects our intuition. Now, our intuition is our ability to know something without analyzing it. Now, think about this. How many times has something happened in your life and you say to yourself, oh, I wish in that situation that I had trusted my gut, or I wish that I had followed my instincts. That's your intuition. Your intuition is that silent feeling that just goes, bah! So we'll have a thought, and all of a sudden, it'll trigger our intuition. Our intuition will say whether that thought is real, whether that thought isn't, whether that thought is a load of codswallop, or whether it's something that we need to take notice of. As a result of that intuition, what then happens inside the body is it triggers an emotion. Now for us, there is a big difference, and I'll explain it in a little bit as we go on. There is a big difference between emotion and feeling. An emotion is a chemical response created in the body due to some form of stimulation that's either real or perceived. Now think about it like this. You have a thought, your intuition says, oh my goodness, your body responds in a certain way. Your body releases chemicals. If it's a happy thought, your body will release dopamine, your body will release oxytocin, your body will release serotonin. If it's a not so positive thought or a negative thought, your body's going to go, as a result of your intuition, into a state of stress. That state of stress, you're going to produce adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, all those kind of like hormones that put you into that fight or flight. What then happens, and all these things happen really, really quickly. Now, this is the first time that we're going through this with you, so it might take a little bit of processing time to sink in. But then what happens as a result of that emotion is it triggers, I'm writing, it triggers our internal dialogue. And the internal dialogue are, how can I say this? The internal dialogue is the director of the movie. Remember that we said about the thoughts, it's a mini movie with no beginning and no end. It all of a sudden just comes out of nowhere. The internal dialogue is how we start to engage and interact with those thoughts. So when I said to you earlier on, don't think about a blue dinosaur, the first thing that you think about is a blue dinosaur. What then happens is you say to yourself, oh, I mustn't think of a blue dinosaur. What must I think of instead? And then your brain will go, oh, well, I could think of a green dinosaur, or I could think of a purple octopus, or I could think of a yellow starfish, or whatever it is. All these things are constantly going on. Your thoughts are those things that come out of nowhere. Your internal dialogue is how you interact and engage with those things. Think about it like maybe your internal dialogue is the director of the movie and the thoughts are the actors. Sometimes the actors go a little bit rogue and they don't want to do what the director says. So then what happens? Me, as the director, with my internal dialogue, I shout at the actors. I say, no, I don't want to think that thing. I don't want to think that thing. But whenever I'm telling myself, like I said earlier on, don't think about the blue dinosaur. When I say to myself, I don't want to think about that, I'm going to think about that. And then what happens as a result of that internal dialogue And this is where I was saying that there is a difference between an emotion. Next thing that comes into play is our feelings. So we have a thought, it pops out of nowhere, it affects our intuition, and our intuition is that quiet whisper that says yes or no, go or stop, high or low, or whatever it is. That then creates an emotion in my body. As a result of that emotion in my body, I have some internal dialogue that goes, oh, this is happening, and then I label it. Now, if we look at chemicals in the body, the chemical for fear is adrenaline, but the chemical for excitement is also adrenaline. But what makes the difference when I feel that emotion or that chemical in my body? It's how I label it. So I've written down here in my notes, feelings are how we label our emotions based on the internal dialogue or interaction that we have with our thoughts. They're also a learned behavior that has been triggered from somewhere. So that is the inside of our internal reality and how we can start to see how things go on. Like I say, this is the side of the circle that I see when I look in the mirror. Now, we had an interesting experience today, Jerome and I. We went to Decathlon, and while we were there, I wanted to buy myself a t-shirt. And when I woke up this morning, I wasn't feeling so physically good. And when I am not feeling so physically good, my internal dialogue is less than positive. And now I put the t-shirt on, and every single time I put a t-shirt on, I would look in the mirror and go, no, that looks like shit. No, that looks like crap. No, I don't like the way that one fits me. And then Jerome came along and looked at the t-shirts and he said to me, well, I really like that one. So he was seeing something that he thought looked good. I was seeing something, but because of my internal dialogue and the way that I was feeling, I was seeing something completely different. And a lot of times, this is what happens to us every morning. We wake up and we stand up and we get out of bed and we go and have a shower and we get some clothes out of our cupboard and we stand in front of the mirror. And what do we say? We look in the mirror and we see all those thoughts that are going on. We see all that internal dialogue that is going on. We see all that emotion that is bubbling beneath the surface. We see all those feelings that we're feeling. Think about it like this. When you wake up and you feel good and you get dressed and you look in the mirror and you say, I feel good today, and you look in the mirror and you go, hey, you look hot today. It always is constantly changing, and it's kind of like how we engage with our thoughts that makes the biggest difference. So what we can do from today, and this is something that I would suggest that you do if you are looking at making a change. Like I say, next week we're going to go into the external side of the circle to see how what else happens outside here and how we can start to influence our thoughts, because we only think about the things that are important to us. If a thought pops up, think about this. If a thought pops up and it's on a topic that is not important to you, do you even bother to engage in it? No, we don't. But if a thought pops up and it is related to something that is important to me, whether it's positive or not so positive, do I engage with it or not? Yes, I do. So how can we start to influence those thoughts? Well, we're going to cover that next week when we do the other side of the circle. But what you can start doing from today is keep a thought journal. Because when we start to keep a thought journal, and we've spoken about this before, they say that something like 95% of the thoughts that we have today are the same as the thoughts that we had yesterday. We can then start to see what we can do about them. The brain is we call it complex simplicity. The brain is pretty amazing. It really is an amazing thing. Like, it's helping me talk to you without a script. It's helping me breathe while I'm talking to you. It's helping me blink and sweat while I talk to you. my tummy's grumbling, my tummy's in a knot and all that sort of stuff, and my brain is processing this all the time, and I don't even have to think about it. But also at the same time, it's really, really simple. And the reason that I have a thought is because I haven't processed it yet. I haven't made sense of it yet. When I make sense of something, it files it in my subconscious mind and it says, done with that. So if I'm having thoughts constantly going over and over in my head, and remember now that you have this knowledge, there is a huge, huge, huge difference between a thought and your internal dialogue. When I start to record my thoughts and also record my internal dialogue, which is me engaging with my thoughts, and I write them down the old-fashioned way with pen and paper on a piece of paper, my brain goes, oh, it's out. I don't have to deal with that anymore. So that's why I make notes. If I'm doing something like this and I want to make sure that I cover all the points with you, that's why I make notes. If I've got the notes on a piece of paper here next to me, I'm not going to be trying to remember them while I'm talking to you. Because if I'm trying to remember them, the way that I remember them is to tell myself over and over again, don't forget that, don't forget that, don't forget that. And then I'm trying to talk to you, but internally I'm going, don't forget that, don't forget that. If my brain sees that they're on the piece of paper out here, that I've put my thoughts out on the piece of paper right here, it says, okay, I don't have to remember that, because when Gareth wants to do it, he can look at the piece of paper. So I know that when I'm talking about thoughts, I have notes about thoughts there. When I'm talking about intuition, I have notes about intuition there. When I'm talking about emotion, I have notes about emotion and internal dialogue and feelings over there. So give yourself a period of like 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at lunchtime, and 5 minutes in the evening, and just sit and write. Just do free writing. Write the things that you are thinking about, right? That, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, da, 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 da. And also write the internal dialogue that you're saying to yourself, because then you can look at them on the piece of paper and see them for what they really are. You can look at those thoughts and you can say to yourself, well, does that thought have a valid place in my life right now? Or does that internal dialogue really require interaction right now? Or can I change it? Because then what you can start doing is you can start influencing these. You can start filing and processing your thoughts. You can start listening to your intuition more. You can start looking at your emotions and saying to yourself, well, what are they really telling me? What are the movies that I'm creating around these things telling me? The same with my internal dialogue. I can start talking to myself better. And when I talk to myself better, what happens? I immediately start to feel better. So that is the inside of the circle of life. Tash says that she has got lots of movies right now. So Natasha, set an alarm for 10 minutes when this is finished and write down all those movies. Like I said at the beginning, because you weren't here at the beginning, thoughts are kind of like mini movies that have no beginning and no end. When we engage with them, that's when we start controlling the actors. Sometimes the actors don't want to be controlled, because every time I tell myself something, it's going to trigger another thought. It's going to trigger another response. It's going to trigger something else in. And my brain is constantly going, ba, 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 ba. It's got to make sense of everything. It's got to make sense of everything. In NLP, when we did our NLP training, they told us, or they teach you, that you currently, or don't quote me, because sometimes I'm well shit at some of these things. They say that you interact with 2 million bits of information per whatever, but your brain can only process between 5 and 7 bits of information at a time. So we have something called our RAS, which is our reticular activating system. And our reticular activating system sorts through everything really, really quickly. And it says, oh, is this important? If it's important, yes, keep it there. If it's But if it's not important to us, then it won't process it. It'll file it to the site. So if we have lots of movies going on, that means that there's lots of stuff that you haven't made sense of and it hasn't been processed. So if you sit down and start to write out those thoughts and write out that internal dialogue, I think those are the two most important things, because there is a big difference between thoughts and internal dialogue. This is one that I'm really, really passionate about. I think this is one of our most amazing diagrams. And when we go through the other half next week and you see how the two halves fit together, it really makes sense. We've also created a group. Some of you might already be in the group, the D-Toxd Living Support Group. You can head on over and click join there. And in there, we also share some more stuff, and I'll share some of the podcasts there. We do some exercise stuff and that sort of stuff. Yes, I'll send you a link in the feed for the podcast. Do I burn it after writing? What I would do, like once you've written out all the thoughts and all the internal dialogue, is go through it and see which ones need to be attended to, because some of those thoughts are going to be valid. You're going to need to address some of those thoughts. Some of that internal dialogue may need a little bit of working on, but some of it may be stuff that you think, well, why am I even thinking that? So kind of like cross it out and give yourself a to-do list, and then once you've extracted from that list of thoughts and from that list of internal dialogue what can be acted on, make a separate list and then get rid of the original list. Yeah, so do something like burn it or throw it away or whatever it is, because then you can give yourself something that can be worked on. Maybe there's some work that needs to be done around the thoughts that are coming up. Maybe there's work that needs to be done around about the internal dialogue that you're going through. But then that will also give you something more finite and something more concrete to work on when we do the other side of the circle as well. I'm going to go now, beautiful people. I hope that you enjoyed that. I really, really hope that you found that helpful. Like I say, if you head on over and look for the D-Toxd Living Support Group, you can post any questions up there rather than post them on the public page if you don't want to. If you want to post them on the public page, I'm more than happy to answer them as well. Or if you just want to send them to me in a private message, you can do that too. So I hope that you found that helpful, and I hope that it gave you something to think about, and I hope that it gave you something to work on. I will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, for our daily intention video that we do every morning. And I will see you same time next week, Monday night, 9 o'clock, for part 2 of the Circle of Life. I hope that you have a great evening, everybody, and I shall see you soon. So that was part 1 of the Circle of Life. We hope that you found it helpful, and we will see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye now.